Welcome to Distilled Security Podcast. My name is Justin Lieblein. I'm here with Joe and Rick, and welcome to our new studio here. Guys, what do you think about this?
Yeah, this is awesome.
We got the headphones, we got the actual real mics instead of the things dangling off us. So over the past couple of months, we've done a little bit of maturing. Also, you should also see focus shots. We've upgraded from 1 to 3 cameras. Into this, as well as some controllers in the back, some monitoring, new desk. We're no longer sitting on a couch and falling asleep into this. The nice thing too, with this desk and everything, we got this from Podshop or Podcast Tables. .shop. We'll put the link in the description and everything. But they're very modular. So once we have actual guests that come on site here, we'll be able to add one and kind of shift it around and all sit into this. Additionally, it gives us capabilities of doing remote people.
Oh, fantastic.
So we'll be able to actually have remote people dial into this. We'll figure out what software to do that. And then we'll have them up on the monitor, as a conversation of us talking with them and have kind of overlays, while we're talking, whether it's to them, to us, both on the same screen and everything. I'm excited for this.
No, this is good. Can I say that I already missed the old space?
The old space.
Yeah, it's like,
you like your
nostalgic.
Chair? Yeah. It fits your butt cheeks,
We'll do these for a while, and then maybe we'll have a throwback episode upstairs, right?
But and we're not quite done yet. We still have, obviously, we got the traditional, curtain still behind us. We're actually going to be putting real wood panels that actually sound dampen right behind us, and then we're also going to be putting a TV with our logo, onto that. Maybe we be able to share some stuff or something like that onto it. We'll figure it out.
That's awesome.
Super cool.
Great. Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we dive into the topics here? The first thing I want to talk about is what I call measuring to the score. So we've all been in consulting, into this. How many companies have we seen that they are so obsessed about their annual, assessment scoring that it's almost to a detriment to themselves, They track this, every single year religiously. They were 2.5 today, so they need to be at 2.6 next year, to be able to show that their CISO knows what they're doing. They can report up to the board and senior management, all this stuff. But is that really the best? Like Rick, I think you had an example where, they weren't really reporting correctly into that.
Yeah, I've seen a couple times where, again, like the score gives people sort of an easy way to deceive leadership in a way sometimes. And there's just so many problems that can naturally come up. I mean, I think the overall intent is good to simplify things down, distill it to a single number. Yeah. Metrics are good. And also executive leadership often doesn't have time to consume all the detail behind, the vast amount of work that's going on in a security program. Right. So saying, it's a 2.8 or whatever that looks like, and we should be a 4.7, or whatever those numbers are, that can be useful to demonstrate progress over time, where you are versus where you want to be, all that kind of stuff. So I think some of the objectives are good, but there's just a ton of pitfalls along the way.
Yeah, I think it can definitely fail depending on how it's handled. What are some of the ways you guys have seen performance assessments result in a score? Like, what are some of the scoring you're talking about? A scale of 0 to 5, like CMMI?
Yeah, that's probably most popular, into that. I'm trying to think if there's...
CSF has their built-in score now, right? And it's 1 to 4.
With their tiers,
CSF,
alignment tiers.
Yeah. And a lot of people, at least when we were at previous consulting, we'd add the 0 into that.
Well, it was always debatable because some clients were not very receptive to seeing a 0 in any given area.
But 1 was some semblance of stuff, and if they had 0 stuff, it was but you're not even at a 1 yet.
Yeah, there's always some debate.
Yeah, and I'd say stay away from that from a scoring perspective, that those scoring in CSF for the 1 to 4, that's really what you're aiming your program to be at, not what you are. The other one I'm thinking about is with NIST 800-171, it's the SPRS score, which starts at 210, I believe, and then get down to a negative number. And what they do is they remove
which
points
makes so much sense to be in
time.
a U.S.-based measurement, right? We got Fahrenheit, we got
But the point of it is that it goes through and removes -5 points for a critical control for protecting CUI, and -3, and then -1 for different levels. And that's a little bit more control based. And then what you were talking about is a little bit more maturity based.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think the question is, we all agree, measuring your program on maturity and continuing the growth and into that is not a bad thing. But the perception of it and how you kind of get entranced into I have to get this score no matter what.
Right.
And not recognizing potential fails, into that. Why don't you bring it, you were talking about a company you worked with that you went in to help them. They were at a score, but they weren't at that score.
Yeah, it's actually happened a couple times now where we've just sort of had to reset perceived maturity levels.
Yeah.
Once we came in and said, due to a bunch of different reasons, either people that you paid before, either internally or externally, maybe gave you a bit of extra optimism when they were reporting, or sometimes a lot of extra optimism.
Right.
And resetting that stuff's hard, right? Because it'll get baked into vendor or customer responses, for instance. If the organization you're working with has clients that want to assess them against things, right? All those either falsities, even if it's not tied to a score, just things where the scope was carved off in a very specific way, or I've seen instances a couple times now where there's actually one in a prior organization I worked with. It's kind of legendary with some people that I work closely with now, where the question from a client assessment was, do you have MFA? Now, that spirit of that control is, do all the people that work on this account have to use multi-factor authentication to access the systems associated with blah, blah. And the person in charge, before we kind of made some changes, always responded yes. And when we came and said, okay, well, how are we doing that? Because I wasn't aware that we had MFA in this way. He was like, oh, no, 2 people have MFA, so we have MFA. And I went, well, that's not at all what the question's asking, right?
That sounds like a very lawyerly answer into that.
But it matters, right? I mean, whenever we're talking about compliance frameworks and all that stuff, right? Do you respond based on the spirit of what's being asked? Do you respond based on the letter of what's being asked? Sometimes the audience matters. Is this a regulator, or is this for internal maturity purposes? Yeah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And all of a sudden, if you say, yes, we have MFA to, in one context, but no in another, well, now leadership's really confused.
Yeah.
Right? So, there's just a lot of problems. And then you roll all that up into an individual score. And those scores, another challenge with it can be, I mean, how frequently do these frameworks actually update themselves? Not
regular.
And how often does the actual environment get more difficult to contend against?
Well, so
every single day.
Right. And I'm hearing some confusion in several areas. One is it's at the whim of the auditor, whim of the assessor, but also it's, I can get behind a maturity scoring, but what does it mean to do a maturity scoring? It means to me, it means to take a look at how mature your processes are and how well your processes function so that they're meeting the objectives of your program. And so, but what I'm hearing, if you're talking about a control, now you're not talking about how mature the process is. You're talking about a binary item. Is the control on or off and MFA? Well, for the scope of those 2 people, well, yeah, sure, they met it. But I like to look at it as, what is the magnitude of what you're trying to look at, and are you tall enough to ride this ride? And so when you look at it from the maturity
so you're talking
part,
scoping as well.
Yeah, scoping, and then getting clear understanding of what that means. And so when you're taking a look at the processes, and you look at these, like the CMM style, 0 means I have no idea I was even supposed to do this, didn't even know I was
in
spell
scope. MFA.
Right. And then all the way up through, 1 is you kind of know about it, 2 is you're doing it ad hoc, 3 is you got some kind of measuring, 4 is you're
managed,
managed, and then 5 optimized.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? To me, 5 means that you built self-correcting processes.
Yep.
So if something breaks, something is going to go and kind of fix that. And that's good for the process. So what I would think would be important, let's use MFA, keep going with that. How mature is our process to ensure that MFA is active everywhere we require it inside of our scope? And so that adds a lot of nuance to it. And I would bet that if you go ask 5 different assessors, you're going to get 5 different answers how you're going to measure that and 5 different grades, right?
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's part of why too. I mean, I've seen organizations go. I'm sure you guys have too, where they'll go auditor shopping, right?
Oh yeah.
Again, because some people might grade hard, some people might grade a little easier. I think a lot of leadership by default often assumes that audits and reviews and assessments are very black and white. If you've done the work a little bit, you know like how subjective and how
Everybody
much gray
has their own
there
rubric.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's multiple good points into that. One, I think coming into auditor shopping, I think that's a cultural perception of how security should actually function or not, type of thing. If you're auditor shopping, you're not looking for the best to help you to get to where you need to go. You're looking for a specific output into that.
Yep.
And so first off, you need to get the right leadership in security that have that idea that external auditors are just going to help you point out the flaws in your program to continue to mature, into that and keep growing into that. I think that's first.
Yeah.
Second, I like what you point out is I think you need to talk the same measuring card, like what accounts are we talking about? What scope of systems are we talking about for this? And can we say yes to all that, or not? If we're just saying MFA, and then you get to your example, it's like, oh yeah, there's 2 accounts that have MFA for this one application. Or I was just reading, I think I'm going to be doing a LinkedIn post, New York DFS, they have their Reg 500, for financial insurance companies. They just fined somebody $2 million for having a breach through a phishing attack and everything. But really, the crux of it, they cite them for multiple things. One, not reporting on time, some other stuff. But they've been filing for years and saying they have MFA. And they didn't have MFA, kind of thing. And this is self-reporting, it's not an external auditor, into that. But again, somebody was checking the box, saying we have MFA. So what led them to say, based on what we're thinking, did they think we only have one financial system in scope and it has MFA and that's it?
And it's probably the same person. Those 2 people.
Right.
Well, but it actually brings up
small world. We all know.
It brings up another point that though is super insidious. I think when you start distilling it all down to a single score, that is
look
what I did there. When you do that though, you end up in a place that naturally can incentivize people to not reflect how the business has changed over the course of the past period. Maybe say it's a year or something, right? So the organization, I'm not saying this is what happened. I don't even know what organization it was because I haven't read up on that article yet. But I can definitely see a scenario where someone was fully compliant, right? And then that organization goes through a merger or an acquisition, right? Fast forward, 9 months after the assessment. Okay, well, it's only been 3 months. So, we're not going to report that we don't have MFA. We still do for the things they care about. And then another year goes by. And then another year goes by.
Yeah, but this is over their email system. And I took it it's probably over Microsoft.
I'm not saying that specific example. I guess the larger point being the business is changing. The external environment is changing. Sometimes the partners that you're working with are changing or the tools that you're working with are changing. All this stuff is changing. Your controls do change, but if you're aligned to a framework, they're changing less frequently.
Right.
And there can, even if you backslide, there can be incentives. I mean, me personally, I think one of the worst things you can do is incentivize security or compliance leaders to hit certain scores for exactly this reason. But it can incentivize people because they don't want to have those hard conversations to say, yeah, well, we didn't get worse. It's just the stuff around me changed and now we're not as far ahead. And so do I really deserve a lower score for that? And again, it's going to...
Or maybe you shouldn't have a cumulative number. Like if you're talking about like a merger acquisition
why is it a single,
coming in, why is that penalizing what we already had built up?
Right, scope change.
But even,
yeah, exactly.
But even the word that you just said there, penalizing, right? By default, a lower score, like all of us as security professionals just assume it's going to be penalized, right? Like...
Yeah, because we don't want to see it go up and to the left, you know.
Yeah. And that's, I think there's a lot
right, to the left.
Well, whatever.
Growing.
Yeah. Getting better, improving. But I think there's a lot of cultural stuff there, and being able to accept bad news and sometimes just celebrate the fact that the bad news is visible. Is a huge thing that you can do.
Well, and I think this comes down to I like the word you use, incentivize, because the people that got this fine from DFS, they're incentivized to report everything's okay.
Right.
You know, they're reporting up to a regulator saying everything's okay. You know, with people with scoring, you know, that are locked into something, they're incentivized for a continuous improvement, you know, into that. Even though, as we know, security doesn't have a lot of operational ability. We don't have the control to apply the patches. You know, all we can do is scream about it, you know, in most cases. So, like, in this case, like, why are we looking at this from a penalization standpoint? If it truly falls, it's not really on us if we've reported it accurately. You know,
I totally agree. And I look at it from more of a risk-based approach because I think when I talk to people, I'm hoping to train them, give them a way to think about things so that you first want to sit back and say, well, what's our architecture and what are the controls we need to have? And are those things working or not? And if they're not working, then what is the risk of that control failure or that control degradation? And then at that point, it's, you know, how do I get leadership to be on board with, is this an acceptable situation or is this one we want to go and apply some mitigation to?
Right.
And as we take it through that, the process to do that, I think that's where it'd be great to get scored on because it's what is our ability to find nonconformities in our system? What's our ability to properly measure the risk that nonconformity creates for us? And then what's our ability to go and get leadership to actually pay attention enough to the conversation so they can weigh in on, is that an acceptable risk? Is it in appetite? You know, is it beyond tolerance? What is it? And so it comes back to, I've been keeping a little list here of the things that become issues. And it's, and now I'm adding another one, is what are we scoring specifically that make up the area? Is it a control like MFA? Is it a whole category of NIST-CSF, or is it just a function?
Right.
What are we scoring? What do you guys see people scoring when you're seeing these kind of measurement assessments?
What do you mean by that?
What makes up an assessment that gets scored? Like, what exactly are they scoring in their program?
Yeah, I mean, the scoring most popular is NIST-CSF, you know. I mean, you brought up 171. I don't have a ton of experience with that. You know, I'm familiar with the score, that it's kind of wackadoodle, you know.
Well, it's a control based. It's basically two different things.
I'm talking about the range. It's,
sure.
Very weird, you know, to me.
Yeah, and it's a weird normalization of it as well. But the difference there is it's
like the
looking
SAT
at your
scores.
Exactly. It's looking at your controls versus looking at how mature you are.
Right.
You can have all your controls in place, and you can still have a CMM score of 1, 2. Not very high. And there's a ton of room to move that needle on how efficient we are, how well does this process function. And one of the things I think I heard, one of the big research analyst firms say a long time ago is that maturity is is a way to approximate or a proxy for how well your security program is functioning. And so when you're looking at a program's function, you're looking at back to the processes I keep going back to versus do you have all the controls in place? One of the processes I like to see is, do you have a good process to do a risk assessment that helps you select the right controls? You know, and so you kind of keep going there.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I frame this in pretty much the exact same way as you. I use slightly different language when I think about it internally because there's like the control itself, like the things that you're doing to achieve a specific objective, right? And then there are these, I think what you're calling processes, right? Which is the overlays that keep those controls healthy over time, that make sure that there's reporting stuff. So there's sort of these very specific things like, do I have MFA? And then there's these more general things like, do I have support to tell someone if MFA is not in place or any other controls not in place? Or
where does it go?
Yeah, all that stuff. So like escalation stuff and all of that. So I definitely agree. And to your question before, Joe, I typically see most often people scoring individual controls or kind of like mini objectives often, and they'll give each of those a score, and then they'll do some sort of thing which is wildly inconsistent from assessor to assessor, which is either average those out or do a weighted average or something like that, to then roll that up to typically like a domain, like all of identity as a for instance.
All right.
And then that rolls up again, right, into an overall score. But then there's also like, if you're a math nerd, you know how much danger there is in averaging weighted averages, and how that can get super wonky.
Right.
And you can end up in areas where, and again, it just generates so much noise and confusion with leadership. You can go, hey, we have a score of 3.2, and there are 30 controls that we need to fix, and we can fix 25 of them by the end of the year. And then leadership goes, oh, great, then our score is going to go to like 4.8, right? And you go, well, no, our score is going to go up like 0.05%. Well, why? Well, because those are all the easy ones, and so they're low weight and all that stuff. You know, like there's just all sorts of stuff that goes
Like
into
the
this.
CIS tiers and everything.
Yeah.
Well, I like that idea because those are control based. So if we say we're going to go and get all the IG2s in place and we're going to start on the IG3s, and you then would say, oh, well, is that going to take our CMM score from like a 3.5 to a 3.6? No, actually, it's going to drop down to a 2.8. Why?
Right.
Well, because we just added all these new controls, which means we have new processes. And when's the last time you saw a new process implemented around here that actually functioned
Right.
efficiently and effectively?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it.
So it's actually going to degrade our score to do that. It also reminds me a lot of the conversations, and I just was at the local Pittsburgh CISA information sharing group, and one of the questions that came out for a presentation I was giving last Tuesday was all around, we put in the new SIM and we put in our new monitoring controls, and everybody thought our security just got worse.
Reporting bias.
Right. And it's no, that was already bad. We just didn't realize how bad it was because we didn't have the tools in place to figure that out. And so now what we have is more metrics, more visibility. And now that we have this telemetry of what's actually happening, we can now go fix it. So our situation can certainly improve, but we didn't get worse.
Right.
We were already
assuming the same amount of risk. We just know more about it now and we're being more honest about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's a thing that should be celebrated typically, but culturally it's difficult to.
So I was asked how you handle that, and I can tell what I said, but so how do you prep the org when you're going to put a new tool in?
When you put a new tool in? So I think there's a couple things, but I mean, first and foremost, I don't know. I can't even have this conversation without saying all the disclaimers like, okay, well, is it just a tool or is it a tool with the right staffing and the right people and all these other things that can go wrong, right?
Yeah.
But I think assuming you have all the resources you need, I mean, as you're having the purchasing conversations, the RFP conversations, right? My expectation is that the people around me or I will be telling leadership, okay, well, this is what it's going to do for us. And, we might not love the things that we see out of it right away, but it's going to give us the ability to react to things that are already occurring that we just don't know about.
Yeah, it's highly in line with what I answered as well when asked that question. And it's if you just go and put that in place and then start updating your metrics and you didn't do any communication, what that's going to do, that you anticipate expecting to see more. And this is the difference between, and so that conversation led to another one, which is why do some people get themselves into that situation? It's because, I think I got myself into that situation once because I didn't have the experience I have today of having been in that situation. And because I was in it and I made the reporting, and then I had to spend the next 10 days explaining why it made sense. I was thinking how much simpler it would have been to spend 2 days months before while
Setting
we're
expectations.
talking about making the purchase, like you said, and doing all the expectation setting, getting it there. And then when we hit to that point and I can say, yes, I am now going to measure, back to measurement, I'm going to now measure our effectiveness of this new tool implementation. And as I predicted, I was right, or maybe I was somewhat right, that our intel have now shown us that we have this many more problems than we would have had. So it spiked 20% the first week, and we tuned it and then actually spiked a little bit more. That's expected, and that tracks to exactly what I told you all 3 months ago when we approved the purchase and we went to buy this thing.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, like and I'll preface this too. If you're a CEO or a COO, earmuffs, it's like just fast forward like 30 seconds. Don't listen to this part. But like if you're a security leader, there's a level of strategic sandbagging here as well, right? Because like, look, what you want to do is you want to set the stage for your team being able to knock it out of the park once they're provided with the information that they have, right? So, we haven't been scanning this pocket of the environment for vulnerabilities. Okay, well, what's that mean? Well, it means we're going to see a ridiculous amount of vulnerabilities on day one, and we're going to have so much work to do. Well, what's that mean? Well, okay, look, we're going to knock them out in this order. We're going to start with criticals or the scary things or all this stuff. And if you set the stage appropriately, you're then setting yourself up to have all those success conversations down the road. And you go, in week one, hey, you know how I told you it would be bad? Oh my goodness, it was even worse than we thought it would be. But we were able to fix this much just like we thought, and da-da-da-da-da. And if you don't do that, exactly to your point before, like, it's just like, well, we just put in this system. What do you mean we have like 3,000 high vulnerabilities? It's like, well, you've kind of seeded the conversation incorrectly. What you should have done is started with, hey, it's going to be bad. We're going to kill the crits first. Oh, and then you can have the conversation. Hey, we got rid of 200 criticals in the first week or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Or maybe not just focusing on OS first patches, or something like that.
Whatever.
And then getting to third party, apps or something like that. Might be on there.
Yeah. Whatever the right prioritization stack is for the tool that you're implementing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, scores can be dangerous, man, and it's like you need to represent reality. You don't want to like teach to the test or like score to the test.
Yeah,
basically.
Well, before we jump into like what kind of takeaways people might want to be able to use based on the lessons we've learned the hard way. Anything else we need to? What else do you want to talk about with us?
So you're talking about takeaways.
Yeah.
So I think, we talked about like getting a good mindset or perception, like set the table off right, into this, tell how you're going to be utilizing these metrics and that you have a good strategy on doing scoping and additional scopes into that and communicate that methodology well with the metrics, into it. So it's well aligned. It's not just if you do some type of cumulative type score or something like that, all the details behind it so that if anybody asks you, here's how we arrived at that, and here's how we're measuring it. Here's how we separate out our business units. We report all those to each one of the ELAs or whatever it may be. I think being very upfront on and putting a lot of thought on how you come to it, provides a lot of good graces, into that. Not just saying, here's a score, next year will be better.
Right, just publish a score on the board report and then walk away.
Yeah.
You probably need the appendix that explains how you got there, like you said. And I think the biggest disclaimer is saying, look, this is going to be very subjective, and it's all based on the rubric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I love the thing that you said a little bit earlier in terms of the score is an approximation, right? And I think reminding people that the score is an approximation of where the program is. It's not exactly where the program is, first and foremost. And second of all, remember the mission is to make sure risk is in alignment with risk tolerance and resources, right? And so if you move from like a 3.6 to a 3.5, that might still be super acceptable because maybe you purchased a giant company and your controls backslid a little bit, but you're still well within risk tolerance and you didn't want to invest the $3 billion it would take to get them up to speed. Like that could be super fine, but you need to make sure that's sort of woven into the conversation. I think what you said about the score being an approximation is a really good start with leadership to have that
Or there could be like good projects already aligned to why, it's not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, hey, we're, merging our IAM solutions together. That's going to take a little bit, to do it right. So yeah, I think just coming out of the gate and be like, nope, it's, degradation, that's bad.
Yeah, this is where we want to be.
You want to explain the ebbs and flows of, how you're getting that stuff. And honestly, I mean, we didn't talk about this too much. It should be as real time as possible. Oftentimes, there's a lot of controls that might prevent you from like measuring frequently, but if you can get more of a integrated system where you're pulling controls automatically and looking at the baselines and what you already decide as this is our measurement stick into that, like a lot of cloud providers, you can get a lot of that real time, and it's constantly changing at that point.
Yeah, that brings up how do you create a proxy for the control measurement, but make it in terms of the maturity of the process that allows that control to operate appropriately. So if you were just going and scoring your controls, are they working, are they not? Are they on all the systems, are they not? And figuring out how you put that in place. But then the other part that we're not talking about, like think of the ISO 27001, the processes 4 through 10, and you're going through those, those clauses. And you look at it and you're like, well, one of the clauses is we do an internal audit every year. So you might do an internal audit, but how mature is your internal audit, and how do you measure that as a control in some of these systems? Like you have to feed it enough information. It comes back to the rubric, I think.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And I've seen bad internal audits. I've seen somebody actually going through ISO. It was literally like a 2-day Zoom meeting that they had. And check
for internal audit.
Yeah,
and one of the advices this might be a takeaway for anybody listening is if you're going to do an ISO 27001 certification, you're going to have your external audit. The best advice I got from somebody who is an auditor said, he always recommends that the internal audit time be about double the time of your internal audit or your external audit. So do your internal audit about twice as long as your external audit.
I
so
like that.
If you're going to, in the way they use the another ISO standard to measure how long it should take in hours for their audit.
Yeah.
That's how they figure out what the price is and for everything like that. And when that happens, now they say, all right, well, this is going to be a 3.5 day audit because of all these items.
Right.
And so he said, I would come in and do I'd recommend investing in a 7-day internal audit because you want to have twice as much chance of me finding it during internal audit as the external auditor will have when they're here for their limited time.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. Well, and Justin, to your point about sort of reporting early and often and keeping your eye on things in as much of a continuous audit as possible, one thing I'd recommend everyone think about if you're running an internal program is look at SaaS providers' trust portals and see if you could build an internal trust portal, even if it's just conceptual and you're not going to put a thing on the web somewhere, or it's a SharePoint site or whatever. Think about how they have the content organized, the types of things they cover, all that stuff. It's usually a really good, the good providers.
So
usually.
you're talking about more in context, like giving the information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Because there's also trust portals out there that have the little checkbox and like,
oh no,
I checked this 15 minutes ago and they still have a policy.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you can, if you can automate your controls to run every 15 minutes and automatically, reflect that on an internal website, like power to you. Yeah. But I think, maybe start slow.
Yeah. Actually, this might be the save for our third conversation, but just kind of getting into that a little bit is with some of the compliance automation tools, they're actually pulling that stuff near real time,
right?
And they're taking a look to see what exactly you have in place and giving you kind of that internal score. They even come with a trust portal that
Yeah.
have an internal that can be used for. You don't have to publish it externally until you're ready, but you can certainly show everybody that internally. So,
Yeah.
anyway,
Well,
not to
and
jump ahead.
what I like about like a lot of those portals and everything, they give you a place to share your attestations that you're sharing out, whether it's self-attestation like a star or something like that, or full-blown ISO or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a nice little added, like, nice little portal. Like, hey, we're coming here for your security. Prove to me that you're secure.
Right.
So, yeah. Great. So, did we do lessons learned?
I think the high levels I'm thinking about is just to think about things you got to keep in mind when you're doing this. What are the scope changes? You're going to have the whim of the auditor. You're going to have the whim of the assessor. You're going to have assessors and auditors changing who are giving you these scores. You might have, people will have you said this, they're incented to do certain things. So their bonuses might be based on keeping or maintaining a certain score. And really it's just understanding what are you actually measuring and how are you measuring it? So you kind of put all those things together. You get to a point where these are all the moving parts. Mm-hmm. And how do you make sure that who the audience for these scores understand that there's a little bit more to it? They don't need to know all these things, so they're not going to really care about all those details.
Right.
But you probably need to communicate, look, there's some subjectivity here.
Yeah.
And we have these items. And if we do this again, we may end up be doing it a little bit different.
Yeah. I love that.
Great. All right. So segue into this. One of the things I wanted to talk about here is board of directors. Mm-hmm. There's been some discussion, especially last year when the SEC mandated it that they have cybersecurity experience, but then kind of withdrew it. It was like, well, that's still good, but we're not going to mandate it anymore. Right. The question comes down to, is that good or not? Type of thing. And I think it's relevant for a lot of this metrics because we were talking about like, hey, if you're under the guise that you're a good score, type of thing, and you're throwing it up to the board and they have no questions, the cricket silence, they're like, oh yeah, that's 3.6. Yeah,
that's fine.
That seems good. That's what our peers are doing, right?
Right. Oh, yeah, that's horrible. I think one of the things you introduced is it unrealistic or just another checkbox? And you made me think about that for a little while. And so as we're thinking about the role of, having a cybersecurity knowledgeable person as a board member, is it unrealistic and could it just be in their checkbox? Well, I think it could be both unrealistic to do it and it could be just in their checkbox if it's done wrong. Yeah. So if you're not managing it correctly, I'm sure that's what could happen. And I think that will actually be a bigger disservice to people to organizations than actually having somebody on there who is knowledgeable and can really guide the organization.
Oh, the illusion of, that's interesting. So the illusion of expertise could be more damaging than, that's a good thought.
Well, the illusion of the expertise will then result in a false sense of security by the rest of the board members.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, I'm on a board of directors for a nonprofit, and the expertise I bring to that is just trying to ask the right questions, see if they're doing the things that I would expect to see.
Right.
And then when they go around the room and other people talk, you have an expert in real estate, an expert in finance. I'm not. And so I got to trust that when they're saying we're doing all the right things, that's happening. Mm-hmm. And so when I speak up and I say, I think that their MSP and MSSP selection makes sense based on the scope of the organization.
Right.
I've actually took some time and looked into it, and I've talked to them, and I understand what they're doing, and that all makes sense. And so I'll bring that perspective. Now, if you have somebody who maybe I've seen this, you've seen kind of unrelated to the board positions, but IT directors also be given the responsibility for security, but not have a lot of background or training on security.
Yeah. Right.
And so they're going to speak from what they know, but
it's operational and not security.
And not comprehensive.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good question with this. There's not an IT requirement on the board of directors, right? IT experience?
There isn't. There's been discussions of should there be or should they have its own
there's
separate
finance,
committee.
There's audit.
But there's not an IT committee. There's an audit committee.
Right. There's audit, and then there's one over the numbers, financials, and everything. But that, I think, is the only requirements, right? From a board director's perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
So it's just interesting to me, I'm asking it, facetiously, it's like, why is security getting picked on, into that, like, if you don't have somebody dedicated to IT, then...
why is that okay?
Yeah, exactly, type of thing. Why would security be a mandated thing if you don't even have some of the capabilities of understanding your tech stack and strategy going forward into there, type of thing. Right. I don't know. That's just like, I get it. I get why there's a push, for that. But at the same time, I'm like, well, why aren't others mandated?
Right. That's my feeling as well.
And where does this stop?
Right. Adding just cybersecurity feels inconsistent with respect to all the skill sets that perhaps could support. Mm-hmm. I get why I could see why it was brought up in the way that it was, because there's so many cybersecurity failings and failure to disclose things that could be material and so on and so forth. And I think good faith arguments around, well, how material are cybersecurity issues sometimes anyway, right? But ultimately, I agree with you. I think if they were going to add cybersecurity as a requirement, you'd probably need to add a couple more as well.
Yeah, so I'll argue against my own thoughts here a little bit, is that, and I'll argue for why maybe the IT thing should be there, even though I truly support, and I'll talk about why I do later, that cybersecurity should be a function of the board. But why not IT? Well, let's take a look. What were some of the big breaches, and why did they happen? Did they happen because some security person didn't put a GRC policy in place, or did it happen because a technical control managed by an IT person in an IT environment wasn't patched in time? And a lot of security teams do not handle the patching. The IT department will handle the patching. So what was the big, I won't talk about specifics, but there was a big credit union, right, several years ago, and they knew about a vulnerability in their DMZ, and they had it prioritized on their list to come soon, but not soon enough, apparently, and that ended up being the breach. Well, was the security person the one who was going to go and actually do the change and put it through the change review and click all the buttons in order to apply the patch? No, it was the IT person. They were going to do that. So to your point, why isn't IT on there? Because if you look at the security breaches, it was because somebody in IT maybe didn't do the thing they were supposed to do.
Oh, yeah. Well, an easy add to that line of thought is just availability as a concept. Very rarely are the security people running the backups or implementing the high availability architectures or things like that. That's all IT. Availability absolutely can cause material financial distress, both from a reporting perspective or failure to report, and from the system's not there when it should be during the high sales volume time of the year. Like, that's a problem. So, I mean, yeah, I get it. But that's exactly my point. If you were going to add security, I think you need to add a couple others. I mean, sales being another one, right? I mean,
I guess they look at it from, it's more from a protection of the company, not whether you're growing or not, into that.
Well, I mean,
so if you have a, terrible IT strategy of, doing that and it's very wasteful, okay, then you're just going to waste money. Or a sales thing, like if you're not pulling in revenue from all the available channels or doing a good customer outreach strategy or something like that, like
I could argue no sales, like sales is a function of protecting the company.
I agree with you, type of thing. But like again,
but where does it stop? And this is, I agree.
One is negligence, and the other is just not being good at selling your stuff.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like,
and is that negligent?
Well, right, but you could make the same argument from a security perspective. I think to an extent. I mean, there is a difference between a good faith security program put together by someone who just isn't necessarily prioritizing things the way I would prioritize them versus, which I think is good, versus someone who just is being truly negligent because they don't care about anything and they just don't know anything. Like there's...
Yeah.
And motive is hard.
Well, and that's where all the layers are built into this, structure and everything, from the audit committee to GRC and all that stuff. Like, hopefully one negligent person doesn't bring down the system.
Right.
Exactly. Type of thing. That there's enough checks and balances that people are like, no, that's wrong, type of thing. And Joe, I want to play a little devil's advocate against you here. Like you mentioned, security should be a function. Would it not fit well under audit? Under the audit committee's purview?
So I don't think of those as two mutually different things because the audit committee usually has directors on the directors on the board who are on the primary board, but also would be assigned to committees.
Right.
So I'm assigned to the governance committee at the board I'm on, and then somebody else is on other committees. And the audit committee, so that same person who's representing it, or you might have multiple people, I think it truly makes sense that the cybersecurity expertise person would join these subcommittees on the board. Yeah. And that would make sense. And then who reports into that audit committee. In some companies I've talked to, the only exposure the director of security or CISO has to the board is through the audit committee.
Yep.
And so they get to talk there, and then maybe once in a while they can be invited in to talk to the whole board. And so I don't think that's mutually exclusive, and I agree that they should be at least influencing the audit
you're
committee.
Talking about the person with that role there reporting into the audit committee. I was talking about more from like, can they just have audit as a background, type of thing,
Oh, should they only have audit as a background? I would say no. That wouldn't qualify for having the cybersecurity expertise on the board.
Broad, and at least with Sarbanes-Oxley, it's first finance, like it's very finance forward, even though there's IT general controls, they're pretty light, to what they cover. And until they expand out, like I've worked with companies that have then created their own IT audit department, and then they start looking at other aspects of the organization on effectiveness of security and monitoring and all that stuff, which is great, out of that. But by default, it's usually very finance focused.
Right. But so, Joe, I think I heard you say earlier, before you said you were going to argue against yourself, that you thought the cybersecurity representation being a requirement was a good idea. Did I hear that right?
I do think so.
And what were your thoughts on that?
I think the intent is good. And if you think back, there's two different groups out in industry that are saying this should happen. One is Digital Directors Network, DDN. Yep. And the other one is the National Association of Corporate Directors, NACD. And if you look at the NACD's studies, and you all probably read this. There's
I read them all the time.
I'm sure you do. That's how I stay awake at night. And they did in cooperation, I think, with SEI at CMU, a 70 or 80 page pamphlet for cybersecurity advice or guidance for boards of directors. So the NACD has that, and it's an actual free document. And what it does is it has these 6 principles that talk about what boards of directors should know when it comes to cybersecurity and how to, guide into that. And one of their recommendations is for both those two organizations that they do have somebody knowledgeable, and they both put out materials that help boards understand, what should they know and what should they be focused on. And it's at least on the NACD side, it's a lot of free guidance. So I recommend that anybody out there who needs to report to the board understands what that document is. Yeah. Go create a free account on NACD and get that document.
You have to create an account?
I think you had to at one point. And once you get that that document, go through it, look at it, and then talk to, what's the natural way you're going to get to the board? Well, probably, like we said, through the audit committee. So talk to them, talk to the head of internal audit, who probably gets a big say in what's happening at the board level, what's going to be communicated, the CFO, and say, these are the things. So find out who your champions are for this, so that when you're reporting to the board, you're actually knowing what the boards are being told are their responsibility levels. And if you are on a board of directors and you look around the room and you don't see somebody that has a cyber expertise, go and get the document, take a look at it, and see if it can help you understand, what others think the responsibilities are for. I'm not saying a single director on the board, but collectively, that board has a responsibility to cybersecurity. And so they want to make sure that stuff is, those functions are happening appropriately. And it'll give some background into it.
Yeah. But so is your note that because this guidance suggests it's a good idea, or was there additional I thought you were going to talk a little bit about why you thought it was a good idea to enforce.
And so why do I think it makes sense is, well, as boards are, I'll just go from my experience of what I get insight to. So when I'm hearing the president of the organization and others talk about what their plans are and what their risks are and who's going to do this stuff, then I can start to ask questions. Well, how are you handling, and then just take all the functions that we always talk about every day. How are you handling awareness? How are you handling good design? Who internally is looking at this? And really it's just kind of break down through those areas, but keep it at a high level. Keep it as just trying to figure out what's actually happening.
Yeah.
What investments are you making this year? When's the last time you had an assessment of any kind, a maturity assessment or a risk assessment? How is that being scored? How is that being communicated? So we just got to go through all those things and ask those questions over time.
Yeah.
And if you don't have somebody on the board who understands what's the background of asking those questions and what a right or wrong answer is, and this is probably getting to the real point, the being able to hear somebody come and report to the board and understand whether you're hearing the right answer, hearing an answer that has any sense, or if you start hearing answers and you're like, wow, I've been through this a lot.
The salesman answer where he talks for 5 minutes and just circles.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I love that. I think I'm hearing two things. So one is being able to having someone on the board who can actually challenge the information flowing upwards as another layer. I think that makes a ton of sense because it is often highly technical, or as we had in our prior conversation, highly nuanced in terms of what's that score mean? How do we get to that score, right? That totally makes sense. And I think the other thing that I heard was having someone at the board that could potentially challenge other strategic directions that other board members might want to take, right? In terms of saying, we want to accelerate this or that, or we want to do this or that. Have we taken this? Have we thought about cybersecurity as the cybersecurity's perspective as we go down these strategic directions?
Expand in China,
right? All those kinds of things. I think
is your CISO
make sense.
Is your who in your organization? And a common question could be, well, who in the organization is looking at the risk of that decision internally,
right?
And what have they concluded? And what do I need to know before the board will approve the budget that supports that?
Exactly right. Yeah. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, because if you're not seeing line items in there, including considerations into that, or how deep is our due diligence onto an acquisition that we're performing over in Vietnam, or something like that. I've actually talked to somebody just recently that he did a lot of acquisition stuff, and they did a pretty good job, but they knew well into it, and he actually recommended against going with this company for all the problems that they had.
Oh, yeah.
Just clear text everywhere. Everything was a little hack. They had interns performing functions against the production server and all this stuff. And he's like, this is the due diligence scratch surface. Like, who knows what we're going to find,
Yeah.
And he got overridden and
right.
then had to fix a whole bunch of stuff for a year and a half, type of thing. But do you have representation into this that will actually give you at least an accurate picture to make a good decision,
right?
Into that.
And Joe, I would also say maybe another very compelling element that I heard you mention before in support of it is if there's 80 pages of guidance that all the board members should read because there's not a member of cybersecurity like representation directly on the board. Many of the board members that I've interacted with in the past would not read 80 pages of cybersecurity guidance. And so probably the easiest route is just to put someone else on the board than to try to get them.
Get that one person like me who reads those documents.
You could either read this or hire this.
Yeah, you can have everyone on the board read this or add someone.
Yeah.
Good point.
That's funny.
Yeah. I think the biggest takeaway then is or my advice is boards should do it, but if they don't do it right, it's going to create more risk, and it'll give that false sense of security. So I'll go back to what we started with.
No, I think that's right. I like the concept of if you're not going to do it right, it's better not to do it.
Well, and I think it's even simpler than that. Forget about the cybersecurity. You need to have somebody knowledgeable to push back on the executive management team. So if you don't have somebody on your board for all the functions that it's coming up through the executive management team and is smart enough to ask the right questions and to push back into that, then you're missing something on that board.
Yeah.
Like cybersecurity, it could be that, or it could be IT, or it could be, other functions as well. That's where I'm like, yeah, if somebody's presenting you something and there's crickets and they're like, it's like, okay, then maybe there's a gap in, skill onto the board.
Yeah. Well, a lot of boards and a lot of organizations I've talked to and been in and worked with on this have a top 20 set of common board reported risk areas that they report on. Mm-hmm. And so to align with that, like how do you to go from what you said to actually, getting that done? It's take a look at what are your top risks that you're reporting to the board. How are you prioritizing those? And for the ones that are making the top of the list, do you have somebody knowledgeable who is representing those areas?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So, cool.
That conversation made me thirsty.
Yeah, I know. To the best part of the conversation here, we are drinking a delicious thing. I've had this for a few months now, and I really wanted to break it out here. So this is the Woodford Reserve, which I'm a really big fan of as kind of a generalized one. Like their double oak is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. This is their double oaked. I can't wait for their double oak to come out.
They're triple double.
Yeah. But this is delicious. I mean,
it's fantastic.
It's
super really good.
Sweet. It's almost like syrupy, like sipping on it. Like it's very sweet, and it just...
I get that, maybe not maple, but maple-esque. Yeah.
So diving
really like
into some of the descriptions off Woodford's, the taste... Rich dried cherry and cranberry fruit swim in a blackberry jam brightened with hints of ripe apple. Chai tea and warming clove notes develop to spice up to the palate.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be great to have on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
That's pretty fantastic.
Actually, I got a drum that we're going to have closer to the holidays.
Nice.
Look at this. I already have plans.
What I like about this is it's very smooth, and I usually like to drop a little ice into one of these just to kind of cut it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I don't...
Not necessary
I'm
at all.
not getting a lot of heat from it. It
is a 90 proof, so it's not very... Yeah, it's... Not very hot at all on the lower scale. But I don't know if you guys know this. This, no pun intended, is kind of my sweet spot. Like, I like stuff right around the low 90s into that. I mean, I'll drink high octane, 1 proofs and all that stuff. But when I can sip on this and there's, it's just nice and easy. And I do like the sweetness coming out of a spirit, natural sweetness, of course. Yeah, that's just delicious.
Yeah. Oh, this is awesome.
This
Thanks
is really
for
fantastic.
Bringing this.
Yeah.
Hey, did you guys hear about the two guys that were robbing a liquor store? The first guy looks at the second and says, "Is this whiskey?" And the second guy looks back and says, "Yeah, but robbing a bank is whiskier."
I did hear that joke. Yeah.
I love it.
That it's usually, what is it done with Daffy Duck and whatever.
Elmer Fudd?
And Elmer Fudd, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'll also say about Woodford, their distillery is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, yeah.
If you have a chance to get down there, it is worth doing. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Something, that the audience don't know. We did pre-COVID. Unfortunately, we haven't made it down there since.
We haven't. Well, maybe we'll have to make a trip.
All three of us, with a few more friends of ours, we went down for a mini distillery tour over a few days after DerbyCon, and it was phenomenal. We went to a number of the distilleries. Woodford was, and maybe it was just the weather that day, but it was such a beautiful distillery. It's not all can say how beautiful like that place is.
Yeah.
So. Anyways, let's go into here. We're a little over an hour on our thing. Let me pull up, of course. Show notes. Talk amongst yourself while I'm pulling up
yes.
the next thing here.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're going to talk about a little bit was vGRC.
Yeah.
And, high level, what is vGRC?
Yeah, what's
and
it stand for?
So there's a lot of, and I just had this conversation today, there's a lot of these fractional services that are covering everything. I've probably gotten 4 LinkedIn invites today to talk to somebody about their fractional CMO, their marketing, their fractional CFO, their fractional human resources. And I actually use all of those. And so it doesn't make me feel bad at all that one of the things I like to do is help companies with fractional GRC teams.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about vGRC, I think today we wanted to cover a little bit about what is it and when you should engage and how it might be different than, say, like you hear vCISO.
Right.
Yeah. That might be a great place to start because I think a lot of people might conflate fractional security services with fractional GRC services. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like what are some of the main differences?
So if you think about it, there's a couple of aspects. One is you have MSSPs, which is a fractional security monitoring service. And they're going to be watching your networks. They're going to have agents or system things on all of your endpoints, all of your servers in your network and kind of watching it. And vGRC is not that. So that's more of the technical controls, looking at what's happening and the people who get the, make and get the 3 a.m. call, right?
Yeah, activity and response.
Yeah, exactly. And then so vGRC, to me, that looks like, and the way I'm used to helping companies with that is, when you think about what an organization needs, and once you become $1.5 billion organizations, you're probably starting to hire these kind of teams internally.
Yeah.
But when you're smaller all the way up to that size, and if you think about what a security team needs, you probably need like 4 or 5 different expertise. And when you're looking at those 4 or 5 different expertise, you probably need somebody who understands how your policies work, and manage that. So a typical GRC team, somebody who understands how to do risk assessments, put in vendor risk assessments, and look at those functions. And then other things organizations might need are, do you have somebody in the security team who understands objectively how to look at your cloud security configuration, how to do a penetration test, and so those things. So when you're thinking about what that virtual GRC team could be, it could be GRC and also product security kind of combined into something that you can get fractionally.
Yeah.
Meaning if you were to hire all those 5 people and just assume they're each going to be a 6-figure salary, which plus or minus isn't too far off,
right,
and probably a lot more than that. Now you're talking $500,000 a year investment in a team, and you probably don't need those people full time.
If you want to get one person, good luck finding one person for that number that has all that experience.
Right, yeah. And
we're not even talking about the hiring process.
Which will take months anyway, just identify people. And we've been through it with a number of folks. So when you're thinking about, the vGRC and you're able to put that in place for a fraction of the time or a fraction of that cost, because you really probably don't need 40 hours a week of every single one of those resources until your scale is much bigger. So, that's another thing you can virtualize. People will say, hey, I want vCISO. I get a lot of calls. Hey, do you guys provide vCISO services? Or we are thinking about a vCISO. What do you all do? And I'll argue right off the bat, maybe you shouldn't be considering vCISO. Do you really want to get one of the most expensive single resources that are out there on the market today that is going to come in and try to do 40 hours a week of the things you might need? You want a vCISO to come in for even a fraction of the fraction, because you need somebody to come in and kind of have some oversight. Are you properly doing risk management? Think about what you're saying about the board. They'll push back and say, is this the right direction? But when it comes to updating all the policies, and when it comes to being, updating spreadsheets and getting all the little things done, I think there's somebody who might be a little bit more appropriate to do that. That is up and coming in their career, the future CISO.
Yeah.
And so when you look at somebody asked me, do we want vCISO? I'm like, well, no, you probably need a fractional set of people where you have that experienced vCISO as just a piece of the team. And so that's how I look at it.
So I'm going to push back with you a little bit on that. So I always defined the difference between the two, that virtual CISO had almost like all the components, that you could do it. But oftentimes, even, early 2000s, mid 2000s, when I started doing virtual CISO stuff, like if you wanted pen testing, we'll throw that in as a module. If you wanted policy work, we'll throw that in for a module,
right.
And usually the core of it was some type of checkpoint iteration and then double checking and make sure you're doing all the necessary stuff with there's usually some type of annual assessment, from a metric standpoint that would also be built into the virtual CISO.
Sure.
With virtual GRC, that's usually how you focus on the GRC component, into that. So it wouldn't necessarily have maybe an annual pen test, that would pull into it. Maybe it would feed in from an external company or something like that. Is that how you're aligned to that, or?
Well, in order to
or
make
would
up
you look
for some,
at a virtual CISO as like all the packages versus? I don't know. I always treat it as very modular.
I gotcha. And so the way you're explaining it is you call it a vCISO, a virtual CISO, but and you can cover all the things, but is it one person covering all those things?
No. It depends on the modules you pick.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you pick all the modules.
No, it would be from different parts of the team within.
Okay. That's probably just a difference in naming than from what you and I were talking about.
But like virtual CISO, I found are usually more focused on like, hey, we have to support ISO. Can you help us to make sure that we're checking off the boxes, we're doing all the things, maybe like focus in scope or focused in, doing a security assurance oversight, like, again, GRC function into there.
Exactly. And when I think of it very similarly, so when we're putting a program together and we're going to offer, say, a vCISO service or a vGRC service, we're going to look for something that's probably going to be a minimum of a couple year engagement, to kind of keep it going, because to get ramped up and get it all mature, then it's going to operate effectively, and it doesn't happen in 6 months, 9 months. Usually takes that first year, and now that you're going, you should keep going. And then in order to usually like sweeten the deal and make it a little bit easier to get things done, we like to offer a tabletop exercise. We like to offer a built-in penetration test. And so you can get one of those every year. We'll do a risk assessment every year. So we'll do these various pieces each year. And when we're doing it, it's built in a way that if you would come along and say, well, I don't really need the pen test, it's not going to change the scope that you're going to see any marginal monthly cost change.
Right.
So you're getting it. You don't have to use it, but we have the resources in order to make that available and do that with some of our fill in a blank offerings. And so that's how I look at it, which I don't think is too much different than what you're looking at. What we do is we position it that way because when somebody is selling vCISO, and in some situations, and it may be different than yours, is you get that one person who's coming in who...
Yeah, they're the point person, essentially.
Well, they're the point person, but I've also seen it, they're the only person. And when they're doing that, they're calling themselves the vCISO. I've seen vCISOs who were yesterday the director of IT who recently got promoted, got caught up in a layoff and decided to hang a vCISO shingle, and now they're the vCISO. And you look at what their background is, well, they were 6 months ago in charge of configuring M365 or all of the...
Conflict of interest?
Yeah. And now, well, they decided to pivot, but they didn't have, like the three of us have been spending years and years and years figuring out, maybe more years for me than you guys.
You got some great.
I have more. And we shouldn't brag about this. And so as you're going through it, you're looking at, well, who's going to do that? So when we put something together, in order to get the best, most effective and affordable price, we definitely have a vCISO level person on the team for it. But we aren't positioning them. They're not positioned forward. They're not the frontline person.
Gotcha.
They're the one who, they're not usually the project lead either. They're the ones who are going to be in there for, a fraction of the time. Maybe it's one full day spread over the month where what they're doing is oversight. Is this going in the right direction? Those kinds of things. And so if you think about the scope of how much time are you going to spend, well, maybe an organization needs 20 hours a week or 15 hours a week over the course of a month on average. Some months it's more, some months it's less. And then out of that, a fraction of that time might be the vCISO, the most expensive resource. And that's the one that wants to make sure that everything is functioning, meeting all the goals.
Right.
And then you have somebody else who is managing day to day. Well, how are we doing against that risk assessment? Are we getting these controls in place? What controls aren't in place yet? What are the nonconformities? How are we addressing these? How's the corrective action program
Pen
going?
test report came back with these. What are we doing about
Yeah, what are we doing? And then
Yeah.
and then the vCISO will jump in at that point and say, well, this is good. We see the pen test report. Let's go have a conversation with leadership about the root cause. Why is this pen test finding here? What is it that's missing from your underlying security program, from your development program, from your change advisory board, whatever it is, that allowed this problem to get in so it could be a finding on a pen test? Let's do root cause analysis, get into proper corrective action, get the person who can talk to top leadership and hold that conversation.
Yeah. I love the clarity that the language of vGRC brings. I think, because it's not a term that I've heard bandied about a ton in the past, say, 10 years or whatever, but vCISO certainly.
It's fairly new,
Yeah.
I would say.
But I like the clarity because, how often have we as practitioners said the words, well, security is not the same as compliance, right? And it's true. They overlap, but they're not the same.
Yeah.
And so I really actually like, even though they're overlapping still, right? vCISO and vGRC, related, but they are different. And I think historically vCISOs would have, kind of to your point earlier, Justin, they'd paint with this very broad brush, and you kind of like, well, I'm going to get like all of these functions from this, but technically,
it's a la carte. What are you picking out of this? And
but if you
add
have
numbers on each of those,
but you could have a security expert, someone who's expert in the technical security of the program, who's not a compliance expert,
Right.
Who's not even, to some extent, a risk expert if they're very implementation focused. They know some risk, but maybe not the academic risk management elements of things. So I like the concept of vGRC being a related but different practice when done fractionally.
Well, and I'll throw this out, and now I want to do a question too. Like one of the things I think a lot of people, especially in executive management, is not separated from the CISO. But the cultural smarts on how to get things done, how to position conversations, how to, kind of lay it up, because
like the political and relational stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And just reading
High EQ.
Yeah. And that's something that some people are naturally better at it than some, but it is often a learned trait, going up through the ranks and dealing with executive management. And if you've never had that from a virtual CISO, all you're doing is throwing reports at it.
Yeah.
And, you know what? I've seen it too, especially in my younger years, like trying to do the stuff. Then you come back in a quarter and none of the things are patched. Like we had a quarterly touch point at this one virtual CISO I did, and be like, hey guys, here's all your findings. Like I'm going to touch base with you in a quarter, and come back and they're like, we didn't do anything. We didn't have time.
Yeah.
It's like,
your ability to actually affect change is a huge capability.
right. Yeah. So at that point, you're trying to then have more conversations and say, like, is this an acceptable thing the way the business is lining up to? Probably not, since they're paying you to be there, type of thing. But then, and then how do you effectuate that change without making enemies of IT, saying like, now I'm coming down and saying you stink at your job, because you haven't done anything in a quarter, type of thing, which is, there probably might be some maybe truth to that, but they have other priorities that they've been doing, So somebody has told them to do other stuff, into this. So into that. The other thing I want to bring up as a question, does liability have anything to play between a virtual CISO and a virtual GRC? because if you're virtual CISO, whether perception or not, legally I don't think so, but you being a virtual CISO and you get like the company gets breached, into that, do you play any part into that?
Boy, I'm really thinking through insurance claims now.
Yeah.
And like, oh man, this order of operations gets crazy.
Virtual GRC, I would think be less, into that. Does that play anything into it?
I have a hot take, but
No, I want to hear your hot take first.
yeah, and so first, if you're virtual, that means you're not actually on the accountability level at the company. You are an outsourced resource. Therefore, everything that's being done is, at that point.
Right.
So can you take a fall for an organization? No. But can you be sued by the organization for giving them bad information? And should you have E&O and maybe directors and officers insurance? Probably, because you'll want to defend against that. So that's my hot take.
Yeah.
But and there's no difference there than if you're doing a vCISO service or you're doing a vGRC service. You're still being thought of as the expert who's giving advice.
Do you think there's no difference between them?
When it comes to that, I don't think companies will differentiate when they're deciding they're going to need to sue you because you gave them bad advice. They don't care.
I just think perception-wise, there might be something there. Like if you're virtual CISO, you're kind of put in the spot of executive management. While virtual, I agree with you, like from a legality standpoint, there's a separation there. But you have the CISO.
Let's talk a little about between the CISO in a company and a vCISO and what the differences are. A CISO in a company, if they're truly a C-level, and it's rare to find a C-level person who has signed papers and is put on the cap table and is truly accountable as an officer.
Right.
There are very few CISOs who have that title, who actually have that accountability. Mm-hmm. And it might be they report to the CIO, they report to the CFO, they report to one of the people who have that accountability. So the difference there is, that's still a difference. The guy from Uber, was he on that level with the company? And he still got held accountable. So. But he was an internal person at that company managing that process. So in that case, I think that they're the ones who need to worry about that risk in that way. And whenever you're a V level of that, where you're really a supplier to an organization, one of the things that, and so if you're not doing this and you're one of those people, my recommendation is that you go into every conversation with, I'm not ultimately able to even sign off on this risk. I am here to give you advice on how this risk might impact the organization, have a conversation with you about what that means, and help you understand your options on decisions. Ultimately, you're going to make a decision because I don't work here. Right. That's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I guess, and I agree with all that. But the perception of the CISO being into the title.
So how do you let that perception get in place, and how do you avoid letting that perception get in place?
Well, I think the perception is natural because it's vCISO if you have that. Whereas that's what I'm saying, like if you have vGRC, like you're performing a vGRC function, I think that's less of a perception risk.
I agree. It could be perceived at a lower level than maybe the vCISO.
It could be, but I don't know that it necessarily would be, because I could see worlds where a vGRC function feeds a chief risk officer or a chief compliance officer.
Right.
Why wouldn't that be the case? But
that person is a C-level.
Well, right.
And I'm saying like you're the virtual C-level.
Fair. But also there's going to be cases then. So if that's true, there's also going to be cases where your vGRC function is your acting, right? Not officially, but your acting risk officer, your acting compliance officer, which in many organizations is sort of an equivalency to a security officer. So I think like it's almost like a connotation versus denotation thing. I think you're right. Like by default, a lot of people think a chief security officer or a vCISO has this like sort of global responsibility. But I'm thinking, I'm like visualizing all these scenarios in my head where I have a firm as a vCISO and a firm as a vGRC. Something goes wrong. And then I'm like, okay, well, who do I go after? And it's going to be super contextual about like what that something is and all that. But like, I don't know that I by default think one is over the other. they seem like, again, they seem like, and this is what I was saying before about like, I like that it brings clarity because there's two sides to that coin. There's the security stuff and the compliance stuff and the risk stuff, and they're all actually different. It's a many-sided coin, I guess, which is a dice at that point. But it does. But it's multiple things, and from my perspective, it ends up being like co-equal partnerships, right? The same way that you'd have a chief security officer be a co-equal partnership with a chief risk officer and things like that. Like slightly different focuses, but obviously highly interdependent. So to me, I don't necessarily see like a risk or a liability thing that would be like inherently different, but that's just how I'm visualizing and defining the term for me, and it is still a new term.
I just threw it out there because, I was just thinking, like, is there a difference from a perception level, into that? And I have seen cases, not personally, but if you come at it and you don't set the right table when you're coming in there as a virtual CISO or GRC of what your true role is into that, the perception is you're in charge. Sure. The perception is you're in charge of the security organization.
Right.
And if you don't contextualize that and like, I'm your expert advisor, but all actions are on you. Like, and as long as I'm not lying to you or negligent in my job and not finding, 3/4 of the things that are actually on your network or whatever it is, type of thing, like, then it's really probably going to be on you for not putting the controls in. Like, or you told me multi-factor is everywhere, but they really wasn't, type of thing.
Right.
Yeah, the way I would handle that is certainly through my contract with the organization. I would have clear terms and conditions and expectations and set all that out up front, explain that up front and say, I can lead the effort to do this. Here's the scope of work. Here's the responsibilities. Here's what we're going to handle. And we're going to take these through this. When it comes time to make a purchase, I'm probably...
I don't have signing authority.
There's no way I'm going to be able to sign off on this. In fact, most CISOs that we talk to don't even have that because they still have to go and get that from a CIO or a CFO. And there's the rare companies where the CISO is actually elevated to the level of being an actual person with
named
their own
officer,
budget. And they can spend money without getting extra approval. But even then, those companies, by the time you get to that point, you can't spend money without procurement being involved either. So unless it's at a lower lower signing level, and so you kind of put all that stuff in place and. I think that hits a little bit on what I would be worried about. And so if I was, let's look at it from the buyers of these services. What should they be looking for?
I was also going to ask if we can put it into this context, who is it right for? Into this. You mentioned the buyers, but, there's probably ideal clients out there, that would be specific. Like,
I know my best clients are those that are in highly regulated industries, growing companies, probably, while we do have customers that seek us out, I'm not intentionally marketing to companies under 20 million, and I'm not marketing to companies over 1.5 billion because below that, they have to make their own decision that they need the help. They'll come to us, we'll work on it. And if they have funding, at that point, they may not have the funding to want to invest in doing this the right way. And in fact, I was having conversations with Rick earlier about what sometimes we'll get something that comes through, and I'm trying to figure out what do we do with that very small organization that needs help, because one of the things that is hard to do when you can't compromise on quality and completeness is sometimes you just can't take a contract with a small company because they won't want to afford to pay for what it takes to do it the way that somebody who has 20 some plus years of experience would have, and bringing that kind of team to the table.
Remember that contract we worked with? We're going back and forth on a $2,000 contract.
Yeah, well, what's funny
and it
is
was come on, we've already spent this.
I just got an email from them the other day.
Oh, really?
And you got it too, except it was at your CISO email address, which was turned off.
Gotcha.
So you never got it. Anyway, but that's funny. And they were just making a reference to somebody else who needed help.
But to your point, though, like a very small organization that needs point in time help to get over a very specific hurdle is a different thing than a company that needs help building or maintaining or operating a program.
Yeah, and I would say those are different for sure. And the one that needs that point in time help, might be something we'd be able to do, because to me, I wouldn't look at that as vGRC at all. To me, that's a pro services engagement to fix a thing, not to build a program that can mature over time.
You can afford the price, you can afford the price.
Exactly. And then, and so when we look at what customers make sense for this, and I'll say, look, this doesn't apply to everybody because there's nuances. You could be a small couple person company who isn't highly regulated, who has a killer idea and has funding and just got a couple $1 million venture or PE money to do this. In that case, call me, because we'll help you and we'll go fast, and we'll probably go faster than you want to go. And we have some customers that have that exact situation. They're smallish, but they're going to sell their company sometime in the future for a huge multiple, and they need to make sure that everything is buttoned up. And so they would typically, if they didn't have funding externally in order to do this, they would not be ICP, ideal client profile. Right. They would totally be somebody that we would be giving them an offer bigger than what they could afford, and it wouldn't make any sense. And then on the other side of that, when you start to hit that $20 million company, you really should, you're growing to the point that it's risky for you not to have somebody with one of our skill sets as an overseer, and then having somebody who can take care of that daily stuff in between the time that we're checking in at the vCISO or the principal engineer style level. Right. And then on the upper side of it, what I look for is once you're hitting in the over $500 million, you're probably putting resources in place, but you probably haven't put the full program in place. And so you could probably leverage some vCISO. You might even, or even vGRC, not even vCISO, because maybe the person who's running that could very well handle the leadership conversations. Right. And they just need somebody to take care of, make sure these policies are good and bring them to me when they're good, and I'm not going to pay a fortune to get this done.
It's maybe they're like a director of security and have zero team.
Yes, exactly.
As a technical administrator, I have to do another vendor assessment. Oh, I have to get these policies done. I have to, absolutely.
Yeah, outsource that to somebody like us who can handle that and put it through a system that can handle, that like a system like that can handle manage the controls in a platform online, and make it more efficient. And then to complete my scale. So once you start hitting that $1 billion company, I'm starting to ask questions. Why are you a $1 billion company that needs exactly these kinds of services? What is it you really need? And as part of it, do you really need us to stand something up, do a program to start hiring people, so the time you hit $1.5 billion and bigger, you're starting to internalize this? It's almost how do we put ourselves out of business and switch the dynamic. Right. For those kind of customers, once they hit that level, what's happening? Things are changing, dynamics are changing. They'll need to have somebody internally who can go to more internal meetings. They'll need to have a security architect who's handling a lot of that stuff. So that'll have to be internalized.
That's staff aug or internalized.
And so at that point, they could be either way. And what also happens at that point is when you're looking at what the 20,000 to the 300 or the 20 million to the $300 million companies are spending for vGRC, the kind of work we might do might be a certain price point on a monthly basis. Well, once you hit that $1.5 billion, am I out of work? No, it just changes. What do they need? Well, what they need is somebody to come and do an independent risk assessment, to guide them through that process, to do a maturity assessment of their program, to help look at how they're handling their various functions. And because of the complexity at that size organization, the price, the price they're willing to spend, Quinn, is just weird how it works out. It turns out to be about the same amount of money as those smaller organizations are spending in order to have that fractional team. So I never look at myself as putting myself out of work by growing into those organizations. It's just the work dynamic shifts. They start internalizing the things that they can do themselves, and they and they should. And then we help them make their internal resources more mature as they grow.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all that. So
what, like any evolving term that's becoming marketing fodder, right? Like, what's the difference between a good GRC shop and a bad GRC shop? Or vGRC, I should say. Like, what are the things to look out for?
I don't even know you have to put the V on it. We'll just talk about.
It could be just GRC
I mean,
shops.
that's really what it is, right? Depth of experience, experience in general.
I'd say breadth of experience.
Breadth of experience. Yeah. Well, explain the two.
So depth. So you have to be good at any individual topic, but GRC naturally encompasses a bunch of topics. Like we can rattle them off very quickly, and we did some of them already. Policy stuff, vendor stuff, risk stuff, right? Knowing the frameworks, knowing how to do appropriate control sampling or challenge an auditor or support auditors, metrics, all that stuff.
Going back to the first topic.
It's all of it. So I think it's important to make sure that someone who used to be an infrastructure director that wants to hang a shingle and could just put vGRC on it, right, actually still has the breadth of experience in the domain, all those domains. And maybe any individual client doesn't need all of those all at once.
Right.
But I would think that a good vGRC shop or just GRC practice is going to have experience in all of those things because this is all an ecosystem and it all plays off each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think I mentioned I did that presentation last Tuesday, and it was for the information sharing group. And I'm not sure if I mentioned how that all came about, but back in February, I was at that same meeting, and I was talking about a little bit about what my organization is doing and what we're researching and what we're putting out. And we talked about GRC. And so we did somebody else asked for a show of hands. Hey, by the way, does Joe need to explain what GRC is? Who knows what it is? And out of this room of people,
GRC. What's GRC?
Yeah, a ton of people didn't know what it was. And so that resulted in them asking me to come back and ended up being an hour and a half presentation on how to put a mature, and so what's the difference between a good and bad GRC program, and put this program in place. And so I built out these, about 15 different concepts to cover, and it went through various topics. And the topics were, and we hit on some of these earlier, what is it? What is risk appetite and what is risk tolerance? And can you explain that in your organization? What is, how do you, and ultimately it gets to the function of the security program is to drive change in the right way for the right things. And so defining GRC, somebody said, well, define that for me. What is G and what's R and C? And together, we came up with, GRC is the bridge from intention to execution. And
I love that.
And
that's a good one.
G is, it's ensuring the right actions happen, the right risks are known, and commitments are kept. So governance, who decides, and it's how decisions are made. The R, risk, is what could impact our objectives and how uncertain are we about it. And C, the compliance is, well, the proof that we did what we said we'd do, showing that we're meeting the commitments we made to our regulators, customers, funders, employees, and anybody who expects that we're running a mature security program.
Yeah.
So if you put all that together and you drive to how you can get that done, it really comes down to, and one of the problems that these organizations were having is they would take a technical finding to their leader with a solution that they wanted to get paid for, and they couldn't really explain it well enough, and they didn't align it to a business risk, so they didn't get any funding.
Yep.
And we concluded as a group that day that leaders fund what they understand. And so if you don't understand what it is, so one of the functions of a good CISO or a good vCISO or vGRC is to make sure that you're creating transparency and that people understand what these risks are. And you need to put the risks into, don't just do a risk, but what is a business aligned risk scenario? If this happens, what's the consequence and how's that consequence going to negatively hurt the organization?
Yeah.
And so when you take it through that formula, now you have something that's a little bit more meaningful. And what can you do with that? You can actually get the leaders to understand what it is, and then you can go in with your leadership ready ask. And so we spent that hour and a half talking through how to get from point A to point B, where point B is developing your leadership ready ask, and then how to get from B to C. C is, well, how do you put a proper risk management program in place? What does a proper risk management program look like? And another area that I kind of skipped over that we spent a lot of time on is the difference between a nonconformity and a risk. And where a nonconformity is you're not doing something you've already decided is a control. meaning you have a policy to do it, and when you don't do it, you're breaking your own rule, you're breaking a standard, whatever it is you're breaking. And whenever you have a nonconformity, it ties to risk. It's different. You should track those different, and you should treat them differently.
Yeah.
Right.
When you treat a nonconformity, you do a root cause analysis. You figure out if you stop the bleeding and where else it's happening, and then you put in a corrective action plan. And you don't really want to report every day in your risk committees, here's our nonconformities. You want to report on how effective is our corrective action plan.
Yeah.
What is the corrective action plan that's going to make that get back put in place? And so now you're talking about the corrective action plan, which is nothing more than just another project you're going to run. And when you're running it, let's go back to something you guys said earlier. You'll have that IT guy who you came in and said, last month I was here and we talked about these things. Did you do anything? Didn't make any progress. So what I like to do is say, hey, go find that person. You're responsible for this corrective action plan. The bus is coming down the road and we're both squarely standing in front of it. I'm telling you what's going to happen next Tuesday when we have the risk management committee meeting. I'm going to be stepped over there outside of in front of the bus. It's your choice whether you're stepping over there with me or you're standing right here in front of it. Because my job, my expectation, what I promise to the leaders is that I'm going to let them know what's failing. And one of the things that's failing right now is your corrective action process. It is late. It doesn't show any signs of getting better. And I don't know what we're doing about it. Now, we could go in there and I could say that, or you could come in there with me and together we'll say that we know this is off track and we have a plan to get it back on track and we need your support. And let's figure out who the blockers are.
Right.
Yeah.
And do that ahead of time.
It could be like a valid one, like we don't have any resources and you threw 3 new projects at me.
Exactly.
You know.
Whatever it is.
Whatever
and we
it
need
is,
prioritization. And so whenever you have a nonconformity, you also have an associated risk because if your control stops, some risk went up. And if you do a measurement of what risk went up and you're looking for that and you're like, well, what got riskier because this control failed? If you can't fight anything, that's actually a great find.
Control.
Yeah, you don't need it.
Yeah.
And so that's something else. So when we take this from A to B to C to D, you're leaving that risk management committee meeting with talking about the things that matter, because this is going to be a very expensive meeting. You're going to have lots of people in there who don't want to spend their hour unwisely. And as you're talking through that, now you're hitting a point where, what's off track. Let's just not put in the appendix all the things that are on track and just put a dashboard up there that say we have 50 things going on right now and 45 of them are on track. Today I'm here to talk about these 5 things. And you can see there are ones in red or the ones that are declining.
Yep.
And it's 2 nonconformities that have corrective action plans off track. And it's these 3 risks that we all decided were highs or criticals that need to be mediums. And their risk remediation plans are not tracking to the agreed upon plan. And I need this organization, this committee's help in getting these back on track.
Yeah.
And if you focus on that, you're going to be much more effective of running that. And I don't care if you're internal or outsourced.
Right.
That's what I think that's the difference between a good GRC team and one that's not effective. They're not doing those things.
I love that.
Yeah.
We had, I think, a ton of really good stuff. But like one, I heard the ability to explain complex situations in a way that's going to resonate with leadership that might not be technical experts or compliance experts and things like that. In a way to the ability to communicate why that stuff matters to them. Right, so communication skills, the ability to build a coalition, right, so you can affect change with other internal parties is a huge piece of it, and the ability to implement and build and adhere to like structure, essentially, right?
Yeah,
I think all of those things are huge kind of benchmarks in terms of separating people that can actually do this work and people that might not be so good at it.
I think another thing too that only comes with experience is providing real world solutions, like multiple solutions that could be into it.
And like pragmatic solutions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can kind of go down, it's like, okay, we can do this. Oh, that won't work. Okay, well, what about this? And how about we do it this way? That solutioning does not exist outside of experience and actually seeing that.
I agree with that.
And so that's a value that you bring a lot of times, into that. I can't tell you how many times doing just general consulting, but basically that's what this is, when it comes down to it, is like we're stuck against a rock and a hard place. And it's like, well, why are you doing it that way? You could do it this way. and they never knew you could do it that
Right.
way. It's like, oh yeah, like a lot of companies do it that way, type of thing. Like I was just talking with, I think I talked about it before, dealing with a company, trying to help them with some of their PCI 4.0 vulnerability management. It was like, guys, you don't have to take the vulnerability rating coming straight out of Rapid7. It says critical, but it's 3 layers deep in your network. You don't have to classify it as critical. If you do,
Right.
you have to fix it within 30 days, and it's in a more difficult spot. Whatever, there's a lot of things.
You're teaching them how to actually read the intent of the standard, not, hey, if it's critical, the systems, the scanner said it's critical, right? But that's only one component of our grading system. If it's critical from them, and then it comes to our grading system, if it's not exploitable and it's behind protection, we actually classify that as moderate, and we don't have to do those in the same way as critical.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, hey, the only access to even exploit this is the admins that can log on to the box. Like, are we still saying this is critical here? Type of thing. And you get a novice GRC person, they're reading like, well, if it says it's critical, it is critical, type of thing. But yeah, from an experience level, and that's just like one example, there's also just like the solutioning of it or the segmentation or just knowing of all the tool sets out there and other applications that could work, like a lot of times. Again, with like a PCI thing, they came out with monitoring your website, and I gave them the manual way that you could do it for cheap. Write Python. I even wrote a Python script for some customers to actually do it their own way. Put it in cron tab and run it, or you can get Cloudflare to do it or Akamai. And I'm like, yeah, you should probably, if you have 10 grand in your budget, you should
just
probably
pay for
do it that way. It'll be way easier. You don't have to monitor it and set it up and all that stuff. It was like, it's probably better that way. So the complexity of challenges, when to spend $1 and when to save $1, into that. And that doesn't come with, people just out of college that have studied their GRC, or just passed their SIP for the first time, type of thing.
It made me sort of think of a thing. I think experienced people very rarely will give ultimatums. They often give options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
I often kid around with my PCI clients. I was like, first option, you can stop taking credit cards.
Well, even if they're ridiculous. No, but I actually think that's part of it.
I was like, I know that's not realistic. Let's go to the next one.
But I do think that's part of it, because even considering fully ridiculous options is evidence that you understand the problem and the impacts and the things that, well, technically you could do this, but you'd never want to.
Right, you can normalize the real answers.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
That.
Well, but that's sometimes not ridiculous. You remember the first client that you and me worked on into that? There was one channel where they were doing like 40 or 50 transactions a year.
It's like, do you really need this? Just turn this off.
Come on, guys. Like, really?
Consolidate
is that thing?
Yeah.
And they ended up turning it off.
Yep.
It was like, this isn't worth trying to.
Yeah, what are the 4 things you can do with the risk? Well, avoid it.
Yeah, exactly right.
That. So we covered who might need it, or what size customers, or what are ideal customers for this kind of thing. We covered what makes a good and the bad type of GRC. We covered, kind of the differences, and maybe it's not so different. It's just a matter of understanding what you're getting when it comes to vGRC versus vCISO. I do agree with you that if somebody has that that C in the front of it, they're probably going to have this expectation that they're doing more, and it's probably on them to make sure that's communicated.
Right.
The thing we didn't really cover is, when does somebody need it? So what do you all think about when is it right for a company? So maybe we have a listener here who's like, I don't know, do I need it? What's the answer?
I mean, honestly, as soon as you can afford it, I think it's probably the right answer. I was just unfortunately working with a friend of the family. She runs a really small business, 8 people. Got hit with a compromised their email, did not have MFA in front. They were sitting on their email server for at least a few months and started sending out change of ACH forms to their customers.
Yeah.
And got hit with again, small company, $250,000 customers paid out to these fake ACH accounts.
Oh.
So you say, what's the right time? It's basically as soon as you can really get somebody. And I think the problem is there's not somebody really dedicated to that small of organizations. That's more time than they can really afford. There hopefully is some packaging out there. I haven't seen anything great. It would have to be highly packaged.
I've seen some MSSPs that do an okay job with proxying for the experience that we have from a GRC and CISO perspective. But I've seen so many who don't really know how to do it right either. So You're right. That is a problem that I don't think there's a solution. And I think some of the symptoms as to why that is because the resources that we have to hire to do this kind of work don't come cheap.
It's a scaling issue.
And, and
that's why I said it has to be highly packaged if there was a attractive thing. One of the things I was surprised, so I don't know if you know the, is it GoDaddy? They have that front to Microsoft Office where it's their splash page for back-end Office, but they integrate with Office 365. And you can go through the advanced thing to log into their Entra instance and everything like that. I tried to, so I went through, and they kind of hide a lot of features. They front-end it with their SaaS solution. The problem is, there's not a lot of security stuff. You can enable MFA, and that's about it. I went into their their Microsoft solution. They stored 7 days of logs into their solution.
Yeah.
And I'm I can't tell what the entry point was.
Right.
That's gone.
Yeah.
So I was just shocked with that. It was 7 days of logs. Why do you even have logs?
So I like your idea better than I like my idea of when somebody needs it. As soon as you can afford it, because almost everybody has something to lose. And the GRC, they're the second line of defense in the 3 line of defense model. Mm-hmm. And who's overseeing to make sure things are happening the way that management's expecting, the way you're expecting.
Yeah.
My answer was going to be that as the moment that you are needing to become audit ready for anything, whether it's you probably need it because the way I look at and explain to my customers, the way that we think about a program like this is everything we do is done first as lean as we can do it. So as efficient as possible. But when we start doing something, we're thinking about the end in mind. The end in mind is where does the evidence that the thing we did happen is the C that I mentioned earlier in the GRC. And it's how do you know that it was done? Mm-hmm. And how can you automate knowing it was done so you don't have to worry about somebody manually grabbing a screenshot and putting it in a folder to know it's done. So it's that kind of stuff. And the minute that you know that you need to be ready for somebody's audit, and to your point, it's probably the minute you know you're going to fill out that cyber insurance application, the minute that you're going to fill out anything or have to tell a customer you're secure.
That was funny. The same friend of the family that I was working with, it was very unfortunate. She didn't also have any cyber insurance, into this.
That's rough.
And she now is starting to look at it.
Of course.
And she's got the form. She's like, I have no idea what half of these questions
what does it even
asking.
mean?
So I have no idea.
I was just helping a startup. And I said, so here we had a startup customer, still do. And we, and one of the things I had to coach them on, so if you're listening, you'll know it was you, is they submitted their first cyber insurance application without any help from us. And when they did, they got this, they got denied that by one, and then they got a huge price from another, I think.
Oh, wow.
And it didn't make any sense. And I said, please do not submit those. We will look through those. We will properly figure out when you're ready to answer these. And since you're not going to go with it anyway at that price point, you're already accepting the risk that you can't get it. So we're not telling you not to buy it. Buy the most expensive one if that's what it costs. Buy the only one you have if that's what you got to do. But let us go through and look at these answers. Let us make sure they make sense. Mm-hmm. So do you have, then with probably 4 months later, we were able to get a program in place with all the things that checked all the boxes legitimately with the ability
so
to
they
do
were
that.
answering no to questions, and that's why it was
Right.
coming
Like,
up.
do you have two-factor
Yeah.
on everything? No.
Yeah.
Well, that's just going to get you.
Yeah.
And then do you have
deployment
sensitive client data? Yes. Okay. Well, like,
right.
yeah.
And so we worked through that. And
Yeah,
so,
got it.
And it was, at their scale, it was actually very trivial to get two-factor functioning everywhere it needed to be.
Right.
And
Just
so,
turn it on Microsoft, is that what you're saying?
well, they're a little bit more complex than that,
okay,
but
gotcha. Yeah, some of
they're
them. Yeah, yeah.
like medical device related organizations
okay,
as well.
gotcha.
So they had some extra things to do, but it was not really, it was a little trivial.
Yeah.
So it was easy to get it in place, but to get that in place and get all the other things in place to be able to do, a high level security assessment of where they're at and what they need to do, like all these started checking boxes.
Yeah.
Literally checking the boxes on the
Right.
cyber insurance form. So the minute you need to do that, and you want somebody to give you guidance through what those things mean and how to answer them. Oh, those are the things I love. And then the thing I love after, I think we had a whole episode, didn't we, where we talked about cyber insurance. But once you,
A little bit, yeah. Did we?
once you get the cyber insurance, then what do you do? And now you need to pre-select your panel, pre-select your
Right.
your IR, your top two IR
Yeah.
vendors, your lawyers, and your PR company, because those are usually the three things you got to pick.
Well, I think my answer to like when do you need it is just when the fear of something going wrong becomes unbearable, or the sort of confusion of what you're being asked becomes unbearable, like the insurance thing or like the client thing, which kind of ties to the audit ready, or just the pain. I think operationally, if you're going through a bunch of administrative stuff related to security, because you're trying to do the vendor assessments or you're trying to do the policies and get them up to date, like if your time could be better spent doing something else, do that cost benefit and see if you need to pay for that.
I mean, how many times do we see post-breach, things become more important, from a security perspective?
Well, and how many times do you see a breach happens because someone's trying to wear too many hats?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you say unbearable. The only reason I hesitate on to that wording is a lot of people have their
different tolerances.
Yeah, or don't even know. Like, again, security is one of those things. If it's never happened, it probably will never happen. Mindset.
That's fair. That's fair. Well, but
we haven't had a phishing incident, so we're probably good.
But think about what would your world turn into if you own a small business and someone was camping on your servers for a month and they were able to send ACH form changes.
Once you run through it, it is way more important. That's the thing. Like, once you go through a breach or an incident or something along that lines, all of a sudden you have a brand new perspective on life. You're like, I never want to go through something like this again, in this manner. That's one of the things is like, once you have that, it's all risk and reward, so it's much like a fire extinguisher. How many of us have had fires in our house, for the most part, probably zero,
right.
But do we still have fire extinguishers? I do.
Because you hear about you hear about it, the risk. But then it's also different too. If your neighbor's house burns down, you go, oh, actually, maybe I should check the dates on my fire extinguisher.
And they're living in a 2-bedroom apartment that, insurance is paying for, but, they also lost all this stuff. It's like, once you realize kind of the personal pain of it, it becomes more in forefront of
too bad they didn't have somebody who was at a place that could make sure they're doing this stuff. Like a cybersecurity expert on a board of directors.
Yeah.
Who would then insist that measuring their security program was done in a way that could be relied on and made sense.
Yeah.
And then in order to get those good measurements, maybe they did need GRC. Look at you just made a whole episode that tied together.
Perfect. I know, isn't that awesome? That's what goes into 10 minutes of planning.
Nice. Cheers.
Cheers to that.
Cheers, guys. Yeah, to the brand new studio and
Love
podcast, and this was a good episode here. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps our algorithms kind of beef up and everything and get more viewers. Stay tuned for next one. We're going to, figure out some good topics here, and we'll have probably more of the studio finished. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.